for being here today. And we've, the Institute of Politics and Public Service, invited all the major presidential candidates. I think it's a testament to your vision that you were the first to accept our invitation. Thank you for being here. And it's clear you have a lot of friends in this room. Well, let's get right into it. We received a lot of questions from students as they were waiting in line in the rain this morning, and you covered a lot of ground. Not surprisingly, so did the questions, and the questions are very good. I'm not editing any of these questions. I am going to group some of them together, though, where they were on a common theme. So let's begin with the central premise, at least of the first part of your remarks, and that was a discussion of democratic socialism. I think your remarks, you did a very good job of describing what it means to you. But as you know, Senator, there's a lot of confusion just around the word. Robert France, a freshman from Brooklyn, who specifically asked me to shout out Brooklyn right there, asks, why do you choose to identify as a socialist when it seems in your platforms you are more in the middle of the spectrum between capitalism and socialism? Well, Axel Kayak, a freshman from Paris, France, in the School of Foreign Service, says, in France, there's no problem with the word socialist. And considering myself a socialist, I feel like the cultural and historical pressure pushes you to call yourself a democratic socialist, although I can't see the difference between the two. So these two questions alone show some of the differences in how people view the word and you. I'm wondering if you would comment to that and maybe discuss that confusion and clarify it just a little bit.
Okay. I think the reason that I have always, throughout my political career, going way back when I was mayor of Burlington, defined myself as a democratic socialist is that in fact is my vision. And my vision is not just making modest changes around the edge. It is transforming American society to make it into a much more vibrant democracy and an economy which works much, much better for working families. And by the word socialism, what is implicit in that to mean is that it is imperative that if we are serious about change, and a lot of people want change, but at the end of the day, real change does not take place unless we have the courage to take on the very powerful special interests that control our country. Now that's my view. Not everybody here may agree with me, and certainly most people in Congress would not. But I think at the end of the day, what we have got to recognize is not just that we are experiencing mass income and wealth inequality or declining middle class, but that a small number of people have extraordinary power. And if we are not prepared to take them on and to tell them that they cannot run the government for their own interests, the real change that many of us want will never take place. So when I use the word socialist, and I know some people are uncomfortable about it, I say that it is imperative that we create a political revolution, that millions of people get involved in the political process, and that we create a government that works for all, not just the few.
Staying on this topic for at least one more question, David Alzate, a sophomore in the School of Foreign Service from Quito, Ecuador, points out that Margaret Thatcher once said, socialists always run out of other people's money. My question is, how will your policies promote wealth creation to ensure their long-term sustainability rather than simply depend on the redistribution of existing wealth?
Well, for a start, David, given the fact that we have seen trillions of dollars being transferred in the last 30 years from the middle class to the top 1/10 of 1%, we start from a position that there is already a lot of money out there. And that is an important point that has to be made. You know, we're not a poor country. We are the wealthiest country in the history of the world. And we should be doing a lot better for our working people, should not be having 47 million people living in poverty. But how do you create wealth? Of course, that we significantly strengthen our economy by having a Medicare for all single-payer system, which will free millions of people to get involved in creating businesses and in creating jobs who today are trapped at work only because they get the health insurance that that employer is now providing. I think that if you have a trade policy not designed by corporate America to shut down plants in America and move abroad, but a trade policy which works for the American worker, you can create over a period of years millions of decent paying jobs. I believe that when you raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, it's not only the right thing to do, but as Roosevelt talked about in the 1930s, when you put money, disposable income, into the hands of people today who have no disposable income, they will then take that money, spend it, and create jobs. So I think the policies that I am advocating will in fact create wealth, will strengthen the economy. These are diametrically opposed and opposite to this trickle-down economic theory that says if we give tax breaks to billionaires in Wall Street, somehow or another, that will benefit the middle class and the poor. History has been very clear. That is a false doctrine. It hasn't worked.
I think I'd probably be run off campus if I didn't move to this topic next. And it's one that you touched on in your remarks, and that is the cost of college tuition. Julia Friedman, a freshman from Albuquerque, New Mexico, asks, under your plan to reduce the cost of college, will the tax on Wall Street speculation be sufficient to cover the cost of the plan? And Zachary Schroepfer, a freshman in the business school from Tallahassee, writes, as many of us know, one of your main policies is to make all public universities tuition-free. In the United States, many of the greatest universities are private universities, Georgetown. So how do you plan to combat the high prices of private universities?
Good, excellent questions. For a start, the answer to the first question is yes. The legislation that I've introduced does a number of things. It makes public colleges and universities tuition-free. It also addresses the very significant crisis in this country of millions of people paying very high interest rates on their student debt. And I suspect some of you guys are going to be graduating here deeply in debt. I see at least one person there. I suspect there are many more. All right? So what we do are two things. All right? Public colleges and universities tuition-free. And then what we also say is that it is a little bit crazy that today you have many people out there who are paying interest rates on their student debt of 6, 8, 10% when we can refinance our homes at 3 or 4%. So what our legislation does is allow people the ability and the freedom to get the lowest possible interest rates on their debt that they can get. And that will save people all over this country collectively many, many billions of dollars. Now, if you add those two features together, free tuition in public colleges and universities, and substantially lowering interest rates on student debt, it is an expensive proposition. It costs about $70 billion a year. And yes, it can be paid for by a tax on Wall Street speculation. All right, second point about private universities, of course, we know that Georgetown and many other private universities do an extraordinary job, and we're all proud of the quality of education they provide. Our legislation includes substantially increasing Pell Grants to make sure that working class and lower income families, middle class families, can get the help they need if they choose to send their kids here to Georgetown or Harvard or any place else. We also significantly increase student work programs so that universities can have funds available to employ students on campus. So Your point is well taken. Our legislation also makes private colleges and universities less expensive.
Let's move to the second portion of your speech. Molly Coyle, a junior in the College of Arts and Sciences from Denver, asks, with your strong beliefs in pacifism, how would you address the recent and escalating violence of ISIS? Does being a democratic socialist state entail opening borders to Syrian and other refugees? And Peter Abdo, a freshman in the college from Bethesda, asks, given recent attacks by ISIS worldwide, more generally, how will you ensure the safety of the American people?
Okay, first of all, let me respond to the first question. And I have a lot of respect for people who may be pacifists. I'm not a pacifist. In fact, I voted against the very first Gulf War, which I had to vote on about within the first month that I was elected to Congress. I think history will record that as the right vote. And then in 2002, after listening to Bush and Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, and listening carefully to what they had to say, I concluded that they were not telling the truth, and I voted against the war in Iraq. But I did vote for the war in Afghanistan because I thought that Osama bin Laden should be held accountable. And I did vote for President Clinton's effort to end the ethnic cleansing in Kosovo. So, no, I am not a pacifist. I think that war should be the last resort, but we have the strongest military on earth, and of course we should be prepared to use it when it is necessary. In terms of where we are right now, I think the main point that I try to make in my remarks is I think it would be a terrible mistake for many, many reasons for the United States virtually unilaterally to get involved in the war in Syria or re-involved in the war in Iraq. And the nightmare is that we send our troops in there in combat, they come back in caskets, we send more troops in, a plane gets shot down, we send more planes in, and 20 or 30 years from now, we're still talking about how we get out of the quagmire in that region of the world. I agree very, very strongly with King Abdullah, who was absolutely right. What is going on there is a struggle for the soul of Islam. There are millions and millions and millions of Muslims who detest and are disgusted with what ISIS and other extremist groups are doing. But now they are going to have to get into the process. It is their troops that are going to have to be on the ground. We should be supportive, and I support President Obama's efforts with airstrikes, with special forces. But the leadership must come from the Muslim nations. In terms of how we protect our country, obviously, we have got to be super vigilant against terrorist attacks. I know there's a lot of discussion about refugees. Let me say a word on that. I am not happy to hear what I have heard in recent days about people who are talking about going into or maybe closing down mosques in America. I'm not happy about hearing that we should close our borders to men, women, and children who have been displaced, driven out of their homes because of terrorism. And I believe that, yes, after thorough screening, which we have the capability of doing, working with the rest of the world, we should accept refugees from that region. That's the moral thing to do. And accepting refugees is what America has always done. And I think it's improper to turn our back on those people now.
Thank you. Thank you, Atlanta. You know, we've done a lot of events throughout the South, but we've never had a turnout like this. Thank you very much. And let me thank Killer Mike. That was quite an introduction. Now, Killer Mike is, as you all know, a great rapper, but he is a lot more than that. He's trying to talk truth throughout this country and, in fact, throughout the world, trying to bring people together. Mike, thanks very much for what you're doing. This afternoon, here in Atlanta, I was able to visit the very beautiful Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change. And I had the opportunity to meet with Dr. King's daughter, Dr. Bernice King. And to me, that was a very moving visit because Dr. King is one of my heroes and clearly one of the great leaders in the modern history of the United States of America. He was a great leader because he was a man not only of great intelligence and great courage, he was a guy who was beaten time and time again, thrown in jail time and time again, but he kept his eyes on the prize. And that's a lesson. Victory does not come easily. Struggle does not come easily. And what we need to do is to keep our eyes on the prize as he did. Always fighting for what he called the beloved community. His vision for a world of justice, of peace, and equality for all humanity. That was his vision. And Dr. King was a great leader because he understood a profound truth. It was true in his lifetime, true before him, and true today. That real change always takes place from the bottom on up, never from the top down. And that's why he and his associates were extraordinary organizers, organizing millions of people throughout this country to stand up to racism, to stand up to segregation, and to create a more just society. And he was a great leader because he believed in democracy and he believed in the importance of people being involved in the political process. And he spent an enormous amount of time and energy to tenaciously fight for the Voting Rights Act so that people in this country, all people, had the right to vote regardless of the color of their skin. And that's a lesson, and Killer Mike just made that point, that I want all of you and all Americans to appreciate. It's not only Dr. King. It's people in World War II in countries, fighting in countries throughout the world to defend American democracy. And when you turn your back on democracy, when you say, I'm just too busy to vote, or I don't really care, or I don't believe in the political process, you're turning your back not only on Dr. King, but on God knows how many men and women who fought and died to protect democracy in this country. And Dr. King was a great leader because he continued to grow and expand his vision. Now, you don't necessarily know this if you watch the TV, but the truth is, he did much more than just fight segregation and racism. What he did against enormous opposition from the establishment, opposition from people who contributed money to his organization. He said, you know, I, Dr. King, have been a proponent of nonviolence my entire life. And I see America engaged in a war in Vietnam that they should not be engaged in, and I must speak out against that war. He didn't have to do that, but he did. Furthermore, he was a great leader because he understood that justice in America was even more than civil rights. It was economic rights as well. And what he said was that, of course, we have to end segregation at lunch counters and at hotels and at universities and schools. But then he also said, what difference does it make if a family can't afford to send their kid to those schools or eat in that restaurant? And I hope all of you will remember where he was and what he was doing when he was assassinated in 1968. He was standing shoulder to shoulder with sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee, union workers who were being exploited, workers who were earning wages much too low, workers who were having work conditions absolutely horrendous. And he said, I will stand with you. Because he understood that to be free in America meant that you have to have economic rights. You have to earn a living wage. And I hope you'll all remember that in the last months of his life, he was prepared to take on the entire establishment and take a hard look at the national priorities of America. And he was organizing, not a lot of people know this or remember this, but he was organizing what he called a Poor People's March. It was a march of African Americans, of whites, of Latinos, of Native Americans. And it was the coming together of all exploited people to demand that the United States government started passing policies which represented all of the people, not just the people on top. And in fact, in the last months of his life, he talked about a nation which had socialism for the rich and rugged individualism for the poor. Atlanta is the city in which Martin Luther King Jr. and his wife, Coretta Scott King, have their final resting place. And I hope that all of you in Atlanta will do everything that you can to keep the extraordinary vision of Dr. King alive. And what I want to do, and what we've been doing throughout this campaign, and the reason why I think our campaign has had as much success as it has had, is that we are simply treating the American people with intelligence. And what that means is that in a democratic society, politics is more than a 30-second ad. Politics is the need to lay out on the table the problems facing our country and in a respectful, intelligent way, figure out how we go from here to there. And politics is also an understanding, as Dr. King understood, that nothing real changes, that we don't make the change that we have to unless millions of people get involved in the political process, what I call a political revolution. And when all across this country, working people and low-income people and people of color and people who are gay and people who were born in other countries, when we understand that we're not going to allow them to divide us up, we're not going to allow them to scapegoat one group or another. When we come together and when we say loudly and clearly, enough is enough, that this great country and our government belong to all of us, not just a handful of billionaires. And that is what this campaign is about. It's a coming together. It's a telling people who have given up on the political process, you better come back in. And when we talk about politics in America, let me tell you what no other candidate for president will tell you, and that is that no president, not Bernie Sanders or anybody else, can do it alone.
You know, Mr. Trump, yesterday I interviewed Ame Horowitz, and he actually got on one of those rafts from Turkey, went to Greece, and then traveled to Germany, interviewed people at the camps where the Syrian refugees are being held. And in spite of what the president says, he says 80% of them are men between the ages of 18 and 50. The president keeps talking about orphans as he insists that we've got to take in these Syrian refugees. Is he being honest with the American people?
Well, Sean, I've been bringing it up for weeks. I looked at the migration, and I'm saying, you know, there doesn't seem to be very many women or children in that. They actually look like mostly young, very strong men. And I'm saying, what's going on? This could be the ultimate Trojan horse. But I'm saying, what's going on? Why are there so many men and so many young, strong men? And people are starting to see that now. I think I'm the first to have brought it up, but people are starting to see that now. In any event, we can't do this. We just can't do it. We have so many problems in our country, and I like the idea of building a safe zone in Syria and contributing and working with other countries and the Gulf states who have to put up a lot of money. They have so much money and they're not spending it. But I think that's great. But you know what, from a humanitarian standpoint, but we can't take these people. We don't know who they are. They're totally undocumented. Nobody knows where they came from. They don't have any paperwork at all. And we just can't be doing it.
You know, so what you're saying, you're willing to offer humanitarian assistance. You're willing to create a safe zone with a coalition. You're willing to provide food and water and medical supplies and cots and blankets and what the people need. Our intelligence officials are warning it's almost impossible to ascertain whether or not ISIS will infiltrate the refugee population like they did in France. James Clapper, the head of intelligence, our FBI director, our assistant FBI director, the House chairman of the Homeland Security Committee are all saying that we can't possibly know if they'll infiltrate. So must you not conclude that the president is willing to gamble with the lives of Americans?
Look, we have a president, frankly, that doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't have a clue. I've been watching law enforcement officials, many of them, saying there's no way we can tell. There's absolutely no method. There's nothing we can do to really tell and to really be sure. And it only takes one or two people. You see the destruction that they can cause and the problems. And then they say, well, we're taking some youth. Well, the two Boston bombers, you know, they came in, who did such a horrible thing with the Boston Marathon. They came in, one was a very young guy and the other was a young guy, but they were very young people when they came in, and they became radicalized and horrible, and you saw what happened there. So it doesn't matter to me. We cannot do this. We should help them in terms of their land. We should help them build a safe zone. We should do whatever we can, get everybody involved, build a big, beautiful safe zone, and then hopefully someday people can go back to, you know, where they want to be probably, which is where they grew up when this whole mess ends. But it's a very, very dangerous thing for our country to be taking these people.
Listen, the State Department issues this generic security threat and warning to Americans. On the same day, Turkey, as you know, earlier today, a Russian warplane was shot down near the Syrian border. They say they did not violate Turkey's airspace. And as a result of that, the New York Times pointed out one of the pilots that parachuted out was shot. And President Obama's comments were, well, Turkey has a right to defend its airspace, and he calls for a de-escalation. I'm not sure he's understanding what actually happened here.
I don't think he understands anything. I mean, he won't even say where the problem is. He won't talk about it. He won't mention anything that's slightly controversial having to do with Muslim. And I know many Muslims. They're wonderful people. But we have a lot of problems. And the problems, as I always say it, they don't come from Sweden. This is a problem that's unique, and it's a very deep-seated problem. And we have to get to the bottom of it. But we can't be taking the people in. We can't be taking the Syrian refugees in. And we have to be very smart. We're not being smart right now. Now you're seeing planes being shot down. I mean, what are we going to end up with, World War III here because we have a president that doesn't know what he's doing?
Let me go to this whole controversy over the fact that you talked about people in New Jersey, that there were reports that, in fact, there was celebrations after 9/11. Now, if we go to the Washington Post, and this was just 7 days after 9/11 on the 18th, the Washington Post says, in Jersey City, within 2 hours of two jetliners plowing into the World Trade Center, law enforcement authorities detained and questioned a number of people who were allegedly seen celebrating the attacks and holding tailgate-style parties on rooftops while they watched the devastation from the other side of the river. By the way, the Associated Press, at the same time, also wrote about rumors of rooftop celebrations. The Washington Post, I looked, I don't see one example where they made a correction in 15 years or 14 years. The Star-Ledger...
They did no correction, absolutely.
And the Star-Ledger also reported it. But the way this was reported is that you made this up whole cloth. You did not make it up whole cloth.
No, I didn't make it up. No, no. It happened. It was on. I saw it. It was all over the place. It was on the Internet. And by the way, Sean, I have received, you had that Washington Post article, which was 6 or 7 days later. I have received hundreds of phone calls in my office from people saying they saw it. They were over there. People that live in New Jersey, they saw it. There was a celebration that they were so happy when the World Trade Center was coming down that they were celebrating. And I've had hundreds of phone calls, and I've had many, many tweets on @RealDonaldTrump. But I've had many, many tweets and people saying that they saw it, that I was right.
Yeah.
And I am right. I mean, I'm 100% right. Look, I'm only saying it because we have to be vigilant. I'm not saying it for any reason. I don't want to stir anything up. But you have some people living here where we have some very, very serious problems. We have to be very careful. We have to be very vigilant.
And that brings up the question, your comments earlier this week about waterboarding. Now, I had interviewed Jose Rodriguez. He was involved in this, and he repeated to me numerous times, and we only waterboarded 3 people. A lot of people don't know that. Only 3. But in the case of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, it led to the intel, which led to the courier, which led to bin Laden. So, according to him, I asked him, would we have gotten bin Laden without the waterboarding? And he said, absolutely, we would not have. Explain why you think that that is a necessary tool that we need to be using.
Well, first of all, I think it works. I have no doubt that it works. And maybe not in all cases, and maybe they'll give false information sometimes, but I have no doubt that it works. But the fact is that they're chopping off heads. They're drowning people in cages. They're keeping the cage underwater for a half hour and then pulling it up with many people in there. They're doing acts that nobody has ever seen before or even heard of before, and we're worried about waterboarding. How stupid can we be? And it does work, the waterboarding.
We lost 3,000 people.
Also,
we lost 3,000 people because of radical Islamists. Let me play for you Congressman Keith Ellison. I think he's the first Muslim American congressman, and if I remember correctly, he took the oath on the Quran. And he made a comment that your rhetoric could cause assaults and murders. And I want to give you a chance to respond to him directly. Listen to what he said.
All right.
He's whipping up hatred to scapegoat a minority religious group, which has some very dangerous historic precedents, as you might agree. I mean, it's the kind of behavior that it's classic demagoguery. And, you know, he's going to get somebody hurt. The people who are mentally unstable or motivated by hate come out of the woodwork, and you see desecrations of buildings that are associated with that group. You see assaults. You see murders.
Mr. Trump, I've never heard you talk about Muslims in general. I've heard you talk about radical Islamists. He is saying that is not the case. What's your answer to him?
Well, again, we have a president that refuses to even use the term radical Islamic terrorism or anything having to do with that. And unless he's going to use the term, unless he's going to understand what's going on, we're never going to solve the problem. We have to solve the problem. As far as what he said, more people are getting hurt by being weak. We can be weak, and we can close our eyes to the problems in this country. And we do that too often anyway. But we can close our eyes, put blindfolders on, and more people are going to get hurt by doing that, Sean. You're going to have so many people hurt, and I'm talking about massive. We cannot continue to be a weak country that's poorly led and just wants to be politically correct about everything. You have to say what it is. You have to use the terms and the terminology. You're never going to solve the problem. You're never going to solve the problem with this president anyway. I've been telling you on your show for 3 years now, you have to attack the oil. You have to take over the oil. You have to attack the oil. They were laughing, oh, how crazy. They were going to generals, and the generals were told what to say, and they were saying, now all of a sudden, 3-4 days ago after Paris, they start attacking the oil, doing exactly what I said. In fact, I said you should do much more. You should keep it.
They are the richest terrorist organization, and they have more landmass than any other terror group before. Look at these numbers. I have a stack of articles. I know you can't see them where you are, Mr. Trump. Today's USA Today. It quotes Karl Rove. I don't agree with his policies. He's not a conservative. He's only been a Republican for just a short period of time out of convenience. John Kasich is now running ads. We'll call it like the golden oldies of Donald Trump, things that he thinks you said that are controversial. You've got a group that has declared war on you, an establishment group with Liz Mayer and Rick Wilson, and they're planning on spending tons of money. But the bottom line is clearly you have now established yourself as the guy to beat. Now they're going to be spending the money. Now they've declared pretty much war against you, and the ads are coming. What is your answer to the battle that they have started?
Well, this is really a violation of the pledge. You know, the pledge was taken by me in all good faith, and this is a little bit of a violation, or a big part of a violation. As far as, you know, like a guy like Kasich, he's so far down in the polls, he's embarrassed. He's the governor of Ohio. I'm beating him in Ohio soundly in the polls, and I'm killing him. I think he's down to 2 now. I mean, I think he'll probably have to get out of the race. So this is just desperation for him. He probably doesn't want to do it, but he's got no choice. Karl Rove is a loser. I mean, Karl Rove has been hitting me for years now, and you know, he still thinks Mitt Romney won the election. This guy doesn't know what he's doing. He spent hundreds of millions of dollars on elections and didn't win one of them. And then last time, in order to get a couple of victories, he went to sure things. I think over the last year and a half, he went to sure elections because he had to get some victories under his belt with the money that he rips off from people. So Karl Rove has been a loser for a long time. The most important poll is also in the Fox poll, and you see it, that I'm beating Hillary Clinton very soundly.
You're beating Hillary Clinton in a head-to-head matchup. That's right.
Right.
So my question to you, though, is obviously the establishment's going to spend millions and millions now. I mean, you see the articles. I assume you're reading them. And I assume that there's going to be some response from you. What is it? And are you considering going third party? I mean, because that came up yesterday.
Let me put it this way. Look, you know, I love the Republican Party. Ronald Reagan was a Democrat also, and he went, you know, Republican and pretty conservative Republican. He was actually somewhat of a liberal Democrat, and he changed. And I was a Democrat at one point, and I became a Republican. I'm really following a very similar path, actually, and we have a lot of things in common, I can tell you that. But, you know, it wasn't the deal that I made. I made a deal, I made a pledge, and they're not treating me right when they do that. And all they do is, you know, they're trying to save themselves. They look very bad. They look very foolish. There are people, all the people that you mentioned look very, very foolish, and they're trying to save something out of it. But it's not a good thing. And it wasn't the deal I made. I have to be honest with you. It wasn't the deal I made with the RNC and Reince and the group. That wasn't what I did. So we'll see what happens. But right now, I'm very happy where I am. I'm leading by tremendous margins. And, you know, we just had the great Iowa poll. In New Hampshire, we're leading by tremendous. South Carolina, which you didn't mention, we're leading by a tremendous amount. And hopefully we can carry that on to the end, and I'll win the election. But, you know, I love the Republicans. I'm a conservative guy, and we'll see what happens.
All right. You made the deal with Reince. Are you happy with Reince previous? Are you happy with the RNC? Karl Rove is not a part of that. These other groups, establishment groups, money groups, are not a part of that. So are you going to hold Reince and the RNC responsible and threaten to go third party, even though he's not involved?
Well, I'm just going to look at it. He's a nice person. He's a nice man. We get along great. But, you know, I mean, there should be some semblance of order within the party. They've lost so many elections. Romney should have won the last election. Some bad things happened there, okay? Some really bad things. And he obviously didn't finish very well in the last month. I don't know what happened to him, but he certainly didn't finish very strong. That wouldn't happen with me. Believe me, we will win. That's why I'm doing it. I backed John McCain. And because of Karl Rove and what happened in that last, you know, few months with Bush, I mean, in all fairness, I don't blame McCain. He couldn't have won that election. What happened at the last few months of the Bush term, I mean, it was a disaster. Now, Romney should have won. That should have been won. Right, and I think Karl Rove still thinks that Romney won. You know, Karl Rove is going around saying, I think Romney won. I think Romney won. It took him like 3 days to realize that Romney didn't win. That should have been an election that was won, and it wasn't. I don't want to have that happen again. We have great potential in our country. Our country has tremendous potential. I always say the American dream is dead, but I'm going to make it bigger and better and stronger than ever before. I'm not going to rely on anybody anymore. I mean, I backed both of them. And again, I don't blame McCain. That was an election that really would have been very hard to win because of what happened in the final months of the Bush administration. But I do blame Romney. He should have won that election. Something happened. He went away. He wasn't doing what he should have been doing. While Obama, say what you want, he was going on talk shows. He was on Jay Leno and Letterman. He was all over the place. Romney was like lost. And I don't want to have that happen again.
Well, I don't think the country can afford to lose again. I'm going to play you two ads.
They cannot afford it.
I agree. We can't afford it with foreign policy, and the economy's in shambles. Last question. I'm going to play you two ads. The DNC attacking Republicans. They say you're grouping all Muslims together, but they even quote you in the ad as saying, we have a problem with radical Muslims. They tend to bypass that, and I want to play your ad against Hillary laughing about Benghazi. Let's play them both.
Including FBI officials. Look.
Well, I don't know why that's funny.
We are at war with radical Islam.
Radical Islamic terrorism. you do have a problem with radical Muslims.
Radical Islamic jihadists.
Radical Islamic terrorism.
How far in are you going to go in an ad war if millions and millions are being spent on you, against you?
Well, look, I built a great company. The company is amazing. It's, it's peanuts we're talking about. I'm going to spend whatever I have to spend. I'm going to spend what I need to spend. And, part of the reason that I'm doing so well is I have some of the great assets of the world. I have tremendous cash flows. When I filed my statements, everybody was amazed at the size of what I've been able to build. And that, frankly, is the reason I tell you that is that's the kind of thinking that our country needs, Sean. We need that kind of thinking. We owe now, if you look, $19 trillion. And we have nothing but problems. Obamacare is a disaster. It's got to be repealed and replaced. Our vets aren't taken care of. Our military isn't taken care of. We're falling way behind. We're the most unprepared now in the military than we've ever been in the history of our nation. Think of that. Said by General Orellana. That was by him. That wasn't by me. I watched him on one of the shows. I think it was on Fox, actually, believe it or not. And, we are in bad shape. And we can take this next election, but we have to be smart, and we do have to be unified. I'm a unifier, believe it or not. A lot of people would say I'm not. I'm a great unifier. I get along with people. And you watch what happens. We'll unify. But we have to unify as a party, because if we don't, I will tell you, we're going to have another loss. And you don't want to lose. You can't have another 4 years of a Hillary Clinton. That would be catastrophic. I will say this. If I get the nomination, I will beat Hillary Clinton.
All right, Mr. Trump, always a pleasure. Thanks for being with us.